The day tech billionaire Garrison Westfall announced his $100 million challenge on live television, my sister Dahlia was scrubbing toilets for minimum wage. 3 months later, she owned half his company. Before we dive in, tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. I know that sounds impossible. Rich people don't just hand over their empires to cleaning ladies. But here's what nobody tells you about genius. It doesn't care about your bank account, your address, or whether you wear a uniform to work. And when true brilliance finally gets its moment to shine, it burns so bright that even the most arrogant billionaire can't look away. My name is Camden, and Dahlia is my younger sister. At 22, she's the smartest person I've ever met, though most people never see past her mop and bucket. She has this way of looking at impossible problems like they're just puzzles waiting to be solved. While she was cleaning penthouses in downtown Seattle, she was also filling notebooks with quantum physics equations that would make MIT professors weep. Garrison Westfall built his fortune on the idea that only Ivy League graduates with trust funds could revolutionize technology. He made his announcement from the stage of TechCrunch Disrupt, wearing a $10,000 suit and that smug smile that said he already knew nobody could prove him wrong. He was offering $100 million to anyone who could solve quantum computing's biggest problem. But he might as well have been speaking to an empty room. The challenge wasn't designed for people like us to win. It was designed to make him look generous while keeping the real money safely in the hands of people who already had everything. What Westfall didn't know was that while he was giving his speech about impossible dreams, the woman who would destroy his assumptions was 20 floors below him, cleaning the bathrooms in that same conference center. Dahlia had snuck away from her shift to watch his announcement on her cracked phone screen, and I saw something change in her eyes that day. It wasn't hope. Hope was a luxury we couldn't afford. It was recognition. She was looking at that arrogant man on stage the same way she looked at her equations, like he was a problem she already knew how to solve. The next 3 months would prove that the biggest mistake a billionaire can make isn't underestimating the competition. It's not even realizing the competition exists in the first place. Because while Garrison Westfall was busy explaining why his challenge was impossible, my sister was quietly making the impossible look easy. And when the dust settled, the maid he never noticed had become the owner he couldn't ignore. This is the story of how brilliance disguised as invisibility became the most expensive lesson in humility a billionaire ever received. This is the story of how my sister Dahlia turned a rigged game into her personal revolution. To understand how we got to that moment when everything changed, you need to know who we were before Garrison Westfall's challenge turned our world upside down. I'm Camden, 28 years old, working at a marketing firm that pays just enough to cover my student loans and split the rent on a cramped apartment in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood. Every morning, I watch my sister Dahlia leave for work in her cleaning uniform, and every morning I feel like I'm failing her. Dahlia graduated summa cum laude from the University of Washington with a computer science degree, the kind of achievement that should have opened doors to Silicon Valley's biggest companies. Instead, she spends her days cleaning the houses of people who made mediocre grades at expensive schools, but had the right last names and country club connections. The irony burns. She's scrubbing the toilets of tech executives who couldn't solve a basic algorithm if their stock options depended on it, while she fills notebooks with quantum computing theories that would revolutionize the industry. Our parents died in a car accident when Dahlia was 16 and I was 22. Fresh out of college myself and completely unprepared to raise a genius teenager. I became her guardian, her big brother, and her biggest cheerleader all at once. I watched her ace every class while working part-time at a grocery store to help with expenses. I watched her graduate with honors while knowing we couldn't afford the unpaid internships that lead to real opportunities. I watched the tech world's gatekeepers reject her applications because her resume didn't have the right zip codes or prestigious company names. For 4 years, I've been watching my brilliant sister clean other people's messes while her own potential gathers dust. She works for families like the Thornfields, old money Seattle aristocrats who treat her like living furniture. Mrs. Cordelia Thornfield barely acknowledges Dahlia's existence, except to complain when the crystal glasses aren't spotless, or the marble counters don't gleam to her satisfaction. What Mrs. Thornfield doesn't know is that while Dahlia polishes her silverware, she's mentally debugging code sequences that could change everything. The worst part isn't the menial work. It's watching Dahlia pretend she's not brilliant. She's learned to make herself invisible, to speak in soft voices and avoid eye contact, because drawing attention to her intelligence makes wealthy clients uncomfortable. They want their help to be grateful and simple, not smarter than everyone at their dinner parties. So Dahlia plays the part, nodding politely while overhearing conversations about business deals she could optimize and technical problems she could solve in her sleep. But I see who she really is during our late-night conversations in our tiny kitchen. After 12-hour shifts of being treated like she doesn't matter, Dahlia comes home and transforms. She spreads her notebooks across our rickety table and explains quantum physics concepts with the kind of passion that lights up her whole face. She talks about quantum entanglement like it's poetry, about error correction algorithms like they're musical compositions waiting to be conducted. I've caught her coding until 3 in the morning on her ancient laptop, the one we bought refurbished with my first paycheck from the marketing firm. She's building theoretical models for quantum computers, solving problems that companies spend millions trying to crack. When I ask her why she does it, she always gives me the same answer. Because the problems are beautiful, Camden, and beautiful problems deserve beautiful solutions. Then came the day Garrison Westfall made his announcement, and suddenly my sister's beautiful problems had a $100 million price tag attached. I was at work when the live stream started, sneaking a peek at the TechCrunch Disrupt conference during my lunch break. Westfall took the stage like he owned the world, which in many ways he did. His company, Westfall Industries, controlled patents on half the quantum computing research in the country. Anyone who thinks they can revolutionize quantum computing is delusional, he declared, that trademark smirk spreading across his face. I'm putting my money where my mouth is. $100 million to whoever can solve the quantum error correction problem that stumped MIT, Stanford, and my entire research and development team. But here's the catch. You have 90 days, and you can't use any existing research. Start from scratch and prove you're worthy of breathing the same air as real innovators. The audience laughed and applauded like he just made a clever joke instead of issuing an impossible challenge designed to make himself look generous while keeping the money safely in his own pockets. I knew exactly what he was doing, creating a public relations stunt that would generate headlines while ensuring no one could actually claim the prize. But as I watched Westfall's arrogant performance, all I could think about was Dahlia's notebooks filled with original research, her sleepless nights spent solving impossible equations, her brilliant mind hidden behind a cleaning uniform. I called her immediately. "Did you see the Westfall challenge?" I asked without saying hello. Her bitter laugh came through the phone crystal clear. "Right. Because billionaires are known for giving poor people chances. He'd probably have security throw me out before I finished introducing myself." That's when I realized we were looking at this all wrong. Westfall wasn't offering a challenge. He was offering an opportunity disguised as an insult. And my sister, the invisible genius who cleaned his competitors' offices, was exactly the person who could make him eat every arrogant word. The excitement I felt after Westfall's announcement lasted exactly 48 hours. That's how long it took for reality to crush whatever naive optimism I'd been harboring about my sister's chances. The challenge wasn't just difficult, it was designed to be impossible for people like us. I discovered this when I called Westfall Industries to request the application materials. The receptionist, speaking in that polished tone that screams expensive education, rattled off the requirements like she was reading a grocery list. $10,000 entry fee to prove serious intent. Access to quantum computing laboratory. Facilities that rent for $3,000 per hour. A formal presentation to Westfall's board of directors, requiring professional business attire and a portfolio of previous research achievements. Each requirement felt like another door, slamming in our faces. $10,000 might as well have been $10 million. I had maybe $800 in my savings account after covering our rent and Dahlia's student loan payments. The quantum lab access would eat through a year's salary in a matter of days, and the portfolio requirement was the cruelest joke of all. How do you prove your research achievements when the entire academic and corporate world has spent 4 years pretending you don't exist? When I broke the news to Dahlia, she was sitting at our kitchen table grading her notebooks like always, her cleaning uniform still damp from the Thornfields pool house. She listened without interrupting, her pen moving steadily across equations that could revolutionize computing while I explained why she'd never get the chance to share them with the world. I could cover the entry fee, I offered, knowing it was a lie even as I said it. I could take out loans, maybe get a cash advance on my credit cards. Dahlia's pen stopped moving for the first time since I'd started talking. She looked up at me with those dark eyes that saw too much, understood too quickly. Camden, no. I won't let you risk everything because some rich guy wants to play games. Besides, look at me. She gestured to her uniform, still reeking of chlorine and cleaning chemicals. I show up to their glass towers dressed like this, and they'll laugh me out before I say one word. But the real breaking point came 3 days later, at the Thornfields' annual dinner party. Dahlia was working late, refilling wine glasses and clearing plates while Seattle's tech elite discussed the Westfall Challenge like it was dinner theater designed for their entertainment. Dahlia called me that night, her voice hollow in a way that scared me. They were talking about the challenge, she said. Mrs. Thornfield told her guests that her sweet little maid thinks she understands computers. She said she caught me scribbling math problems during my break. Isn't that precious? Then she suggested, someone should tell me that cleaning products and quantum physics don't mix. I heard her crying through the phone, quiet sobs that she was trying to muffle. The whole table erupted in laughter, Camden. Like the idea of me being smart was the funniest joke they'd heard all year. Dr. Miranda Blackwood was there. You know, the physicist whose house I clean on Thursdays. She laughed the loudest. That phone call changed something fundamental in me. I'd spent 4 years watching the world overlook my sister's brilliance, but this was different. This was cruelty disguised as humor, intelligence dismissed as delusion, simply because it came packaged in the wrong uniform. Dahlia came home 2 hours later looking broken in a way I'd never seen before. Her hands were raw from scrubbing, her spirit crushed under the weight of other people's expectations. She sat down at our kitchen table, pushed her notebooks away, and said the words that nearly destroyed me. Maybe they're right, Camden. Maybe I'm just fooling myself thinking I'm smart enough for their world. I watched my brilliant sister, the woman who could solve quantum equations in her head while mopping floors, convince herself that she wasn't worthy of the same opportunities given to mediocre men with expensive degrees. I watched her internalize the cruelty of people who couldn't solve a basic algorithm if their stock options depended on it. That's when I realized this wasn't really about quantum computing or $100 million prizes. This was about a system designed to keep genius locked away when it came from the wrong zip code, spoke with the wrong accent, or wore the wrong uniform. This was about a world that would rather maintain its comfortable assumptions than acknowledge that brilliance doesn't require permission or pedigree. Westfall's challenge wasn't just impossible because of the technical requirements. It was impossible because it assumed that only people who already had everything deserved the chance to prove they were worthy of more. The entry fee, the lab requirements, the formal presentations, every barrier was carefully constructed to ensure that only the privileged could participate in their own validation. But sitting in our tiny kitchen, watching my sister doubt the very intelligence that made her extraordinary, I made a decision that would change both our lives forever. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do to a rigged system is refuse to accept that the game is unwinnable. Sometimes the biggest revolution starts with one person who loves someone enough to bet everything on their hidden brilliance. Was about to prove that the most expensive mistake a billionaire can make is underestimating the power of family, desperation, and a genius who finally gets tired of being invisible. 3 days after watching my sister break down in our kitchen, I made the most reckless decision of my life. While Dahlia was at work, scrubbing someone else's floors and pretending she wasn't brilliant, I sat at my computer and did something that would either save us both or destroy everything we had left. I liquidated my retirement fund. All of it. 4 years of careful saving, gone with a few mouse clicks. Then I called my bank and took out a second mortgage on our tiny apartment, using the equity we'd built up as collateral for a loan I had no business qualifying for. The loan officer, a soft-spoken woman named Janet who probably went to business school with people like Garrison Westfall, kept asking if I was sure about the risk I was taking. I wasn't sure about anything except that watching genius die in silence wasn't an option anymore. By the time Dahlia came home that evening, reeking of bleach and exhaustion, I had already submitted her application to Westfall Industries. $10,000, transferred from my newly emptied bank account. Her portfolio, assembled from photographs I'd taken of her notebooks when she wasn't looking. Her presentation slot scheduled for 8 weeks from that day. She found the confirmation email open on my laptop screen. "Camden, what did you do?" Her voice was barely a whisper, but I heard the panic underneath. "What I should have done years ago," I said. "I bet everything on you." The explosion came exactly as I'd expected. She screamed at me, called me an idiot, demanded to know how I could risk our entire future on something so impossible. "You had no right," she shouted, pacing our tiny living room like a caged animal. "What if I fail? What if we lose everything? What if they laugh at me just like the Thornfields did?" I waited until she ran out of breath, until the fear underneath. Her anger finally showed itself. Then I said the only thing that mattered. "We've already lost everything that matters if we don't try this. Dad always told me you had the kind of mind that comes along once in a generation. I'm betting everything on that being true." She cried then, really cried, and I held my brilliant sister while she shook with terror and possibility in equal measure. The next morning I made another phone call that would change our lives. Professor Evelyn Hartwell had been Dahlia's favorite instructor at UW, the only teacher who truly understood what my sister was capable of achieving. When I explained our situation, Professor Hartwell was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. "I've been wondering what happened to Dahlia," she finally said. "She was the most naturally gifted student I'd taught in 20 years. I always assumed she'd landed somewhere amazing. When I told her about the cleaning jobs, the rejections, the years of wasted potential," Professor Hartwell's voice turned hard. "This ends now," she said. "I have lab access at the community college, after hours, when nobody's asking questions. If Dahlia wants to change her life, I'll give her the tools to do it." We developed our strategy over coffee in Professor Hartwell's cluttered office, surrounded by whiteboards covered in equations that looked like art to me and poetry to Dahlia. The plan was simple in its desperation. Dahlia would continue her cleaning jobs to maintain our income and avoid suspicion. She'd use her access to the Thornfields' house to work on their high-end computer system during her night shifts when the family was asleep. And I would handle all communication with Westfall's team, presenting myself as her research coordinator to avoid the prejudice that would come with her real job title. For 3 weeks, we lived like spies in our own lives. Dahlia would clean houses during the day, then slip into Professor Hartwell's lab at night to work on quantum computing models that made my head spin. I watched her transform during those late-night sessions, watched the invisible Maid disappear and the brilliant scientist emerge. She moved through complex equations like a dancer, her hands flying across keyboards and whiteboards with a confidence I hadn't seen since college. But it was during her day job that everything changed. Dahlia was cleaning Dr. Miranda Blackwood's home office, the same physicist who had laughed at the dinner party about cleaning products and quantum physics. Dr. Blackwood had left her quantum physics textbooks scattered across her desk, marked with notes about the very problem Westfall had challenged the world to solve. As Dahlia dusted around the books, something caught her eye, a margin note about quantum decoherence, the noise that destroys quantum computing stability. She stopped cleaning and started reading, her brilliant mind processing years of failed research in minutes. That's when she called me, her voice electric with excitement. "Camden, what if everyone's been trying to fight the noise instead of listening to what it's saying?" I was at my marketing job, pretending to care about advertising campaigns while my sister was potentially solving the unsolvable. "I have no idea what that means, but the way your voice just changed tells me it's important." "It's not just important, it's everything. They're all approaching quantum error correction backwards. Instead of trying to prevent decoherence, what if we harness it? What if the noise isn't the enemy but the solution?" She hung up before I could respond, and I knew she was already deep in the zone where genius lives. That place where impossible problems become elegant solutions. That night, Professor Hartwell found Dahlia in the lab at 3 in the morning, surrounded by whiteboards covered in equations that looked like nothing she'd ever seen before. Dahlia had cracked it, not just understood it, not just theorized about it, but actually solved the problem that had stumped MIT, Stanford, and Garrison Westfall's entire research team. The invisible Maid had just revolutionized quantum computing, and, in 5 weeks, she would walk into Westfall's boardroom and prove that the most dangerous thing you can do to a rigged system is show up anyway. The morning of Dahlia's presentation, I watched my sister transform herself in our tiny bathroom mirror. Gone was the invisible Maid who spent her days being overlooked and underestimated. The woman staring back at us wore Professor Hartwell's borrowed blazer and carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew she was about to change the world. "You ready for this?" I asked, adjusting her collar like I used to before her high school science fairs. "I've been ready for 4 years," she said. "I just needed the right stage." Westfall Industries occupied 40 floors of downtown Seattle's most prestigious tower, all glass and steel reaching toward clouds that seemed designed to intimidate people like us. The security guard barely glanced at our IDs before directing us to the executive floor, where billion-dollar decisions got made by people who had never doubted their right to make them. The boardroom was everything I expected and worse. 20-foot windows overlooking Elliott Bay. A conference table that probably cost more than our annual rent. And sitting around it, the kind of people whose resumes read like a greatest hits collection of American privilege. Harvard MBAs, Stanford, PhDs, venture capitalists whose family money traced back to railroad barons and oil tycoons. Garrison Westfall presided over it all from the head of the table, looking exactly like a man who had never been proven wrong about anything that mattered. When we walked in, his eyes swept over Dahlia with the kind of dismissive assessment that rich men perfect in business school. "Ms. Chen," he said, consulting the tablet in front of him. "I see here your application lists your current occupation as domestic services. Is this some kind of joke? Did someone put you up to this?" The room fell silent, waiting for my sister to shrink under the weight of their collective doubt. Instead, Dahlia walked to the front of the room with the steady grace of someone who had spent years preparing for this exact moment. "Mr. Westfall," she said, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the boardroom, "you said you wanted someone who could think differently about an impossible problem. I've spent the last 4 years watching how wealthy people approach challenges, throwing money and prestige at problems until they go away. That doesn't work with quantum physics." She moved to the whiteboard like she owned it, picking up a marker with the same confidence she'd once used to clean their offices. No PowerPoint slides, no corporate presentation template, just pure, elegant mathematics flowing from her mind to the board in real time. "Your entire industry has been approaching quantum error correction like it's a war," she continued, writing equations that made half the room lean forward in their chairs. "You're trying to build fortresses against quantum decoherence, spending millions on equipment to fight the noise. But the noise isn't your enemy, it's your partner." Dr. Harrison Vance, Westfall's head of research and development, interrupted with the kind of condescending tone that probably worked on his graduate students. "This is impossible. You're claiming you can achieve quantum coherence stability for 47 minutes using commodity hardware. Our team spent 3 years and couldn't get past 12 seconds with million-dollar equipment." Dahlia didn't even pause in her writing. "Your team was trying to silence the quantum noise. I learned to dance with it. The decoherence pattern isn't random. It's the system's way of telling you what it needs to maintain stability." She turned back to face the room, her equation-covered whiteboard looking like abstract art behind her. "The quantum noise contains error correction information. Instead of fighting it, I developed an algorithm that reads the decoherence pattern and uses it to predict and prevent quantum state collapse." The room stayed silent, but I watched their expressions change from skepticism to confusion to something that looked dangerously close to respect. Westfall's smug confidence was evaporating in real time. "Prove it," he said, his voice lacking its earlier certainty. Dahlia smiled, the kind of smile that suggested she'd been waiting her entire life for someone to say those exact words. "I thought you'd never ask." She connected her laptop to their quantum computing system, the same million-dollar equipment Dr. Vance had mentioned. Her fingers moved across the keyboard like a pianist performing a concerto she'd been practicing for years. The room watched in absolute silence as stability readings appeared on the main display screen. 12 seconds passed, then 30, then a minute. At the 5-minute mark, Dr. Vance stood up from his chair. At 15 minutes, other board members began whispering among themselves. At 30 minutes, Westfall's carefully maintained composure cracked completely. "This is impossible," he muttered, staring at readings that exceeded everything his company had achieved in a decade of research. "Actually, Mr. Westfall," Dahlia said, her voice steady and controlled, "this is Tuesday afternoon, and according to your own challenge parameters, I believe I've just earned that $100 million. The silence that followed was the sound of an empire realizing it had just been conquered by the person it never saw coming. The invisible Maid had become impossible to ignore, and the billionaire who thought he knew everything about everything was learning that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody bothers to notice. At 47 minutes and 32 seconds, Dahlia's quantum system was still running perfectly. The only thing that had collapsed was Garrison Westfall's assumption that genius came with a pedigree and that revolution required permission from people who had never been underestimated in their lives. What happened after Dahlia's quantum computer finally stopped running changed everything, but not in the way anyone expected. Westfall sat in stunned silence for exactly 37 seconds before his business instincts kicked in. He straightened. His tie cleared his throat and offered my sister a standard employment contract with his company, a generous salary, full benefits, and the chance to work on quantum computing projects under his supervision. Dahlia looked at the contract for about 10 seconds before pushing it back across the table. "Mr. Westfall," she said with the kind of calm that comes from finally holding all the cards, "I didn't solve your impossible problem so I could become your employee. I solved it so I could become your partner." The room erupted. Board members started talking over each other. Venture capitalists began frantically texting their assistants, and Dr. Vance looked like he was having some kind of existential crisis about everything he thought he knew about quantum physics. But Westfall just stared at my sister like he was seeing her for the first time. What he didn't know was that Dahlia had spent 3 sleepless nights preparing for this exact moment. While I thought she was just perfecting her quantum algorithm, she had actually been developing something much more revolutionary. A complete business strategy for turning her breakthrough into an empire. She had already filed provisional patents on her quantum error correction method through Professor Hartwell's academic connections. She had secured preliminary funding commitments from 3 of Westfall's biggest competitors, all of whom would pay handsomely to license technology that could put him out of business. And she had spent her final week of cleaning houses documenting every quantum computing patent Westfall's company had filed, identifying 17 critical flaws that could invalidate his entire intellectual property portfolio. "You have 2 choices," Dahlia continued, spreading her own contracts across the conference table. "You can partner with me as equals, sharing ownership of the quantum error correction breakthrough that will define the next decade of computing. Or you can compete with me while I license this technology to everyone else in the industry." The easy silence that followed was the sound of a billionaire realizing he had been outmaneuvered by someone he never thought was playing the game. 6 months later, Dahlia was featured on the cover of Wired magazine as the youngest chief technology officer in quantum computing history. The Chen-Westfall partnership had revolutionized 3 separate industries and generated more patents in half a year than most companies file in a decade. But the real victory wasn't the money or the recognition. It was watching my sister walk into boardrooms where people listened to every word she said. The $100 million became seed funding for the Chen Foundation, which Dahlia established to identify and support brilliant minds trapped in service jobs across the country. She created scholarship programs, mentorship networks, and laboratory access for people whose genius had been overlooked by traditional gatekeepers. Every week, I watched applications pour in from janitors with engineering degrees, waitresses with medical research backgrounds, and security guards with theoretical physics insights that could change the world. Professor Hartwell became the foundation's academic director, finally able to nurture the kind of untapped potential she had been discovering in community colleges for decades. The Thornfield family, facing financial difficulties when their tech investments collapsed, applied for a business loan from Dahlia's venture capital fund. The meeting where Mrs. Thornfield discovered her former maid was now her potential financial lifeline was awkward in the most satisfying way possible. But the moment that meant the most to me came 8 months after that first boardroom presentation. Dahlia was giving the keynote address at MIT's annual technology conference, speaking to an auditorium filled with the kinds of students who had always been told they belonged in rooms like that. At the end of her speech, she said something that perfectly captured what we had learned about hidden genius and artificial barriers. Your current circumstances are not your final destination, she told them. Intelligence isn't measured by the doors that open for you. It's measured by the doors you choose to walk through, even when everyone tells you those doors weren't meant for people like you. As I watched my sister receive a standing ovation from some of the most prestigious minds in technology, I realized that our real victory wasn't proving Westfall wrong about quantum computing. Our real victory was proving the world wrong about who gets to be brilliant, who deserves opportunities, and what genius actually looks like when it finally gets the stage it deserves. The girl who used to clean their offices now owned companies that employed their children. The maid they never bothered to notice had become impossible to ignore. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I think about how many other Dahlias are out there right now, scrubbing floors and serving coffee and waiting tables, their notebooks full of solutions to problems the world doesn't even know it has yet. The most dangerous thing you can do to a system designed to keep genius invisible is refuse to stay hidden. Sometimes the most powerful revolution starts with someone who loves you enough to bet everything on your hidden brilliance, and ends with you finally believing you deserve the chance all along.